More than 300 million invasive catfish silently spread across the globe, demonstrating an alarming capacity to thrive in critically polluted waters. The scale of this biological invasion shatters standard ecological models. 300 million adult specimens represent over 600,000 tons of constantly moving, consuming biomass. This living wall directly collides with the fragile aquatic ecosystems of North America, putting a $7 billion fishing industry at absolute risk. The massive volume of a species that eats almost anything systematically dismantles the economic foundation of the region. Wildlife agencies deploy extreme containment measures. Crews pump rotenone and harsh aquatic poisons directly into the waterways to halt the advance. The chemical reaction is immediate. A thick, pale chemical sediment drifts through the water column, settling heavily onto the riverbed and smothering the substrate. Oxygen levels drop to zero. For tens of kilometers, the artificial canals become sterile, toxic dead zones. These aggressive protocols guarantee a total biological wipeout. Yet, standard chemical warfare fails. The complex physiology of the invasive catfish overrides the lethal environment. Native populations asphyxiate within minutes. The invaders simply suppress their metabolism and endure the chemical shock. Their evolutionary architecture naturally processes the toxins that destroy other aquatic life. While distant Eastern markets quietly study this indestructible biomass as a potential industrial resource rather than an ecological plague, local eradication efforts completely crumble. The toxic sediment slowly washes downstream, and the dense schools of invasive fish continuously swim forward to colonize the next river network. Poisoned North American canals represent merely a consequence. The true root of this invulnerability lies in pure biological engineering. Millions of years of evolution forged this resilient hardware. This biological engine allows invasive species to thrive in toxic sludge, while the native giants of the Mekong perish against concrete hydroelectric dams. Catfish currently encompass over 3,000 distinct species. Their global dominance relies on extreme metabolic efficiency. When aquatic oxygen levels drop, their physiology instantly shifts gears. Specialized suprabranchial organs extract oxygen directly from the surface air. Gills filter thick, anoxic water. The digestive tract chemically breaks down anything it encounters. Insects, algae, decaying organic matter. Complete omnivory, zero waste. Reproduction scales with brutal efficiency. A single mature female releases 100,000 eggs in one breeding season. The invasive variant functions as an unstoppable survival machine. The ancient Mekong River demonstrates a lethal contrast. Here, the endemic Mekong giant catfish represents an entirely different biological model. 3 meters long, 300 kilograms, one adult individual matches the dimensions and mass of a standard wooden riverboat. These leviathans demand vast, uninterrupted water flows to trigger their reproductive systems. Massive hydroelectric dams now block their ancient migration routes. Concrete barriers alter natural water velocity. Millennia-old breeding cycles simply shatter. The giants possess no mechanism to survive the new industrial hydro infrastructure. Their numbers reflect this total systemic failure. The population of these endemic giants has crashed by 90% in just 50 years. While the population of endemic Asian species shrinks, the African catfish, brought to India in the 1990s, proved that commercial aquaculture can become the perfect vector for an ecological invasion. It started as a bold historical experiment to engineer an economic miracle. The African sharp-toothed catfish reached market weight in just 6 months. It survived in stagnant, oxygen-deprived ponds at holding densities exceeding 100 kilograms per cubic meter, the equivalent weight of an adult man packed into a space the volume of a standard washing machine. A living cash crop. But the precise biological traits that made it a flawless agricultural product guaranteed an environmental catastrophe. Heavy monsoon floods washed over the boundaries of the experimental containment zones. The barriers failed. The fish escaped into the wild, spreading relentlessly through the massive Ganges and Yamuna river networks. A controlled resource became an apex threat. This species does not recognize the boundary between day and night. It hunts continuously. In the dark, muddy currents where underwater visibility predictability drops to absolute zero. The catfish navigates using elongated sensory barbels that register the microscopic vibrations of nearby prey. A young water bird paddles across the opaque surface at midnight. A sudden, violent surge shatters the dark water, instantly pulling the bird into the depths. Native fish, frogs, crustaceans, and waterfowl all disappear into a digestive tract capable of processing almost any organic matter. Ecosystems are hollowed out. Decades of this aggressive, round-the-clock feeding have pushed local aquatic life into a steep decline. Recognizing the irreversible biological damage, Indian authorities enacted a strict legal ban on breeding this specific predator across multiple states. Yet, despite routine confiscations, the species continues to multiply in thousands of illegal hidden ponds, leaving official inspectors completely powerless against an invasion that has already embedded itself into the continent's major waterways. A torrential downpour hits the Florida asphalt. Through the heavy rain, a distinct abrasive scraping emerges, the collective friction of rigid pectoral fins dragging hundreds of heavy bodies across wet concrete. The Indian scenario of escaping reservoirs pales in comparison to this biological anomaly. Here, since the 1960s, an invasive predator has breached the ultimate physical barrier. It stepped onto land. Standard fish suffocate within minutes of atmospheric exposure. The walking catfish operates on a completely different anatomical blueprint. Its gills are supported by a specialized suprabranchial organ, a highly vascularized, spongy structure acting like a rudimentary lung, capable of absorbing atmospheric oxygen as long as the surrounding air remains humid. This respiratory adaptation allows the species to survive entirely out of water for almost 24 hours. During intense storms, a biological trigger activates. The fish propels itself out of a flooded pond. It uses its stiff pectoral spines as mechanical levers, thrusting its heavy frame forward in a violent serpentine motion. Hundreds of meters of dry terrain turn into a traversable highway. A new water body is breached. This terrestrial mobility renders standard agricultural perimeters completely obsolete. The predator easily infiltrates commercial aquaculture facilities, directly targeting vulnerable nursery ponds. A single rainy night allows an entire school to bypass traditional isolation barriers and consume thousands of juvenile fish, destroying the harvest long before maturation. Manual netting proves statistically futile against a biomass that actively relocates overnight. For freshwater farms across the state, this biological loophole translates into a catastrophic deficit, generating estimated losses of $1 to $5 million every single year. Traditional eradication protocols collapse under these amphibian conditions. Pumping chemical treatments into small canals creates a toxic trap, rapidly stripping the water of native species and leaving the aquatic environment completely dead. Yet the primary target easily evades the chemical strike. The invasive catfish simply crawls up the muddy banks and vanishes into the damp underbrush without a single sound, forcing agricultural engineers to seek a radically different, commercially driven strategy for the next phase of containment. While the global community burns millions of dollars trying to eradicate the invasive catfish, Chinese engineers took the exact opposite approach. They converted this biological threat into the core raw material for the largest closed-loop protein generation engine on the planet. Viewed from above, the province of Hubei presents a staggering picture. 4 million hectares of aquatic surface, an area roughly the size of Switzerland, stretched toward the horizon. The landscape rapidly scales down into a flawless geometric grid of artificial ponds. No chaotic riverbanks, just concrete and water. From the edge, the reservoirs look like a monolithic, undisturbed mirror. But beneath this dark glass, a massive hydrodynamic machine operates relentlessly. The engineering concept relies on hundreds of interconnected basins sharing a unified filtration and circulation network. Gravity feeds water through specialized channels, moving it from upper settling tanks directly into 2-meter deep rearing zones. Engineers specifically calculated these dimensions to maintain stable thermal layers for bottom-dwelling species. A continuous low-frequency hum vibrates through the walkways as submerged industrial aerators inject oxygen into the incredibly dense biomass. Total environmental control. This singular infrastructure drives 60% of all global aquaculture output. The extreme biological resilience of the catfish is no longer an ecological problem, but a strictly calculated macroeconomic solution. The numeric contrast defines the scale of the operation. A massive population of 1,400,000,000 people demands an uninterrupted, fast-growing nutrient supply. The grid delivers. Every operational cycle strips away the unpredictability of nature, pushing the annual harvest from this network alone to an absolute yield of 300,000 to 450,000 tons. Scaling production to 450,000 tons required the complete elimination of natural randomness. Engineers stripped the reproductive cycle from the wild, relocating it entirely into strictly controlled industrial hatcheries. Here, biology bows to mathematics. Spawning tanks maintain absolute clinical sterility. Heating elements lock the water temperature to the exact decimal, stripping away unpredictable environmental variables. Thermal sensors monitor the tanks constantly, triggering reproduction on a strictly engineered schedule. A single paired broodstock releases 50,000 to 200,000 eggs per cycle. Mass creation, zero deviations. The incubation phase operates with mechanical precision. Millions of embryos force a synchronized hatch in exactly 24 to 36 hours. But breeding is only the baseline. The true engine of this living factory lies in the physics of the feed conversion ratio. The catfish operates as a highly efficient biological processor. Its feed conversion ratio stands at 1.2 to 1.8 kilograms of feed for every single kilogram of harvested fish. That requires nearly 5 times less caloric input than a standard cattle farm, a near-perfect transfer of mass. The physical structure of the diet drives this metabolic efficiency. Extruders superheat soybeans, grains, and agricultural byproducts, forcing the raw biomass through high-pressure dyes. They produce a highly engineered, extruded floating pellet. Buoyancy ensures visibility. Surface feeding allows operators to monitor consumption in real time, cutting environmental waste to absolute zero. Every gram of protein finds its target. After 3 weeks in the nursery phase, the asset is ready for the grid. High-volume pumps engage, drawing millions of larvae through submerged grading pipes and flushing the living payload directly into the massive grow-out ponds. But a feed conversion ratio of 1.2 is not the limit of efficiency. To cut feed costs by 30%, engineers implemented a multi-level biological symbiosis of poultry and fish. Massive duck houses are suspended directly over the water. A single hectare, an area roughly the size of a professional soccer field, holds up to 2,000 ducks alongside tens of tons of catfish. The stinging smell of ammonia fills the enclosures. Each bird drops 120 to 150 grams of raw biological waste every day. The organic payload falls through slatted floors into the pond. High concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus ignite a chemical chain reaction. Microscopic phytoplankton devour the nutrients. An explosive algae bloom turns the water a thick, vibrant green. Photosynthesis rapidly oxygenates the tanks while neutralizing toxic ammonia. The transformation is absolute. Dirty, hazardous bird excrement becomes a premium high-protein catalyst. The catfish operate as living biofilters, vacuuming the sinking organics and grazing on the dense plankton soup. This closed loop slashes industrial feed consumption by 20 to 30%. It increases the total output value by 1.5 to 2 times. Maximum biological efficiency. By continually scavenging the bottom for decaying matter, the fish destroy bacterial breeding grounds and drastically lower disease rates, pushing the ecosystem toward its extreme density limit. However, concentrating tens of tons of biomass into 1 hectare inevitably provokes a toxicity crisis, demanding continuous water purification. How do you prevent an ecological catastrophe inside a closed system? The primary technical challenge is not feeding the stock, it is stopping the fish from poisoning themselves. Unconsumed feed and organic waste rapidly accumulate, saturating the environment with lethal spikes of nitrogen and phosphorus. To stabilize this chemical balance, engineers route the effluent through a multi-stage filtration architecture. The contaminated liquid first flows into massive settling basins. Gravity takes over. Dense sludge sinks to the floor. The remaining fluid, still heavily loaded with dissolved nutrients, channels into sprawling biological ponds. Here, organic engineering replaces mechanical filters. Dense mats of floating aquatic plants absorb the excess phosphorus directly from the current. Beneath them, specialized filter-feeding fish consume the suspended microalgae and organic debris. They act as living vacuums. This semi-closed recirculation setup operates on a massive scale, with giant treatment tanks holding enough liquid to fill 3 Olympic swimming pools. By controlling eutrophication and stripping the water of toxic ammonia, the facility sustains extreme farming densities without dumping polluted runoff into local river networks. The biological engine safely recovers 60 to 70% of the total volume for the next cycle. A soundless stream of purified water glides back into the main reservoir. As soon as the chemical balance of the water stabilizes at a 70% recirculation rate, the extraction of the accumulated critical mass begins. Water levels drop sharply. The geometry of the harvest initiates as heavy-duty polyethylene mesh, specifically engineered to withstand the razor-sharp pectoral spines of the catfish, deploys in a massive arc. The curved net narrows. The mesh acts not as a conventional trap, but as a horizontal hydraulic press, compacting the living biomass into an impossibly tight corner. Space vanishes. The surface boils from the sheer volume of compacted fish. Thousands of heavy tails strike the water simultaneously. A deafening roar of thrashing bodies and violent splashes overwhelms the facility. Pure kinetic energy. Because oxygen levels plummet instantly inside this tightening circle, industrial aerators blast pure oxygen directly into the crushing mass just to keep the product alive for extraction. The scale defies natural biology. A single standard pond yields 150 to 400 tons of fish in one swift sweep. One net drop equals the entire annual output of a traditional open water farm. Driven by market values ranging from $1,600 to $2,500 per ton, the extraction operates with ruthless military precision. Cranes hoist the writhing mass into transport tanks, leaving empty water behind. By the end of the seasonal rotation, the synchronized ponds generate a relentless wave of exactly 10,000 tons of raw material, moving straight toward the factory conveyors. Immediately after the harvest, 10,000 tons of biomass enter an environment where time is measured in minutes, and a living organism definitively becomes standardized industrial raw material. The chronological shift is absolute. Automated lines systematically dismantle a biological cycle of several months in under 12 hours. The facility processes 200 to 500 tons of raw material per day, a volume equivalent to the weight of 3 empty commercial airliners. The air vibrates with a metallic clank and the continuous hum of conveyor blades cutting flesh. Optical sensors scan the geometry of every carcass in 200 milliseconds. Pneumatic arms align the bodies. Rotary knives operating at 3,000 revolutions per minute strip muscle from bone. Pure mechanical precision. Speed defines value. The zero-waste protocol leaves no margin for loss. Conveyors redirect every anatomical component into secondary supply chains. Acid baths dissolve the skin to extract industrial gelatin. Heavy crushers pulverize the remaining skeletal structures into high-protein animal feed. High-speed centrifuges spin the raw fat, refining the crude tissue into clear commercial oils. Engineering entirely subordinates biology to the factory floor. 0% waste. The finished fillets immediately hit the thermal threshold. Flash freezing systems plunge the temperature from -18 to -40 degrees Celsius, instantly halting cellular degradation. Continuous streams of perfectly rectangular frozen blocks slide down the final steel belts, moving relentlessly toward the global market. In the river systems of North America and India, this specific catfish provokes an uncontrollable ecological crisis, but Chinese infrastructure transforms the invasive threat into a strictly engineered bioreactor. Other nations attempted similar farming models only to fail as chaotic natural spread quickly outpaced human control. Here, success ignores the aggressive nature of the fish. It relies entirely on absolute hydrotechnical isolation. Production clusters dominate the vast inland plains of the Yangtze and Pearl River basins. These are not traditional lakes. They are highly synchronized, closed-loop mechanisms. Dark, nutrient-heavy sludge flushes continuously from the primary breeding zones. The mechanical roar of pressurized water drives this thick slurry through heavy concrete channels directly into deep-settling reservoirs. Solid organic waste sinks to the bottom. The surface liquid then pushes forward through dense cascades of biological filters. Millions of hungry microorganisms strip away excess nitrogen and phosphorus. Finally, purified water discharges safely back into the surrounding environment. Zero eutrophication. Strict biological containment. Yet, even perfect engineering requires a colossal endpoint. The domestic market of 1.4 billion people acts as a giant demographic absorber for this massive protein output. The internal demand instantly swallows the entire supply. The country completely consumes every single ton of cultivated biomass, neutralizing the invasive threat and permanently preventing any long-term ecological damage. These isolated, precisely engineered tanks from the Yangtze Basin solve a much larger problem. They offer a direct mathematical answer to the global protein deficit for a projected population of 10 billion people. For centuries, human survival relied heavily on traditional livestock. That biological model demands vast land masses and massive water reserves. A standard cattle ranch requires grazing pastures the size of a small island just to sustain a single commercial herd. The physics of mammalian growth are inherently inefficient. Aquaculture rewrites this biological equation. The primary metric determining success is the feed conversion ratio. A cow consumes roughly 7 pounds of agricultural feed to produce just 1 pound of edible meat. A farmed catfish requires only 1.5 pounds of feed to yield that exact same pound of protein. The energy transfer is entirely different. Resource waste drops by nearly 80%. This high-efficiency conversion allows for ultra-high stocking densities without expanding traditional agricultural boundaries. Instead of sprawling plains, production happens inside compact, hyper-dense aquatic clusters. Engineers routinely pack up to 100 pounds of living biomass into a single cubic meter of water. The physical footprint shrinks to a fraction of a traditional farm, yet the overall output multiplies. These facilities sit directly on inland plains, operating immediately adjacent to the primary metropolitan consumption markets. Shortened growth cycles strictly overlap with precision feeding schedules. Pumps continuously circulate the filtered water, automated dispensers drop carefully measured nutrient pellets, and the industrial harvest never halts. The entire infrastructure functions as a relentless, year-round biological conveyor belt. This relentless biological machine proves a fundamental truth. The core issue is never the invasive species itself, but the absolute lack of infrastructure to process it. In the wild, catfish dominate. They thrive in murky, oxygen-deprived river sludge where native ecosystems suffocate. Thanks to a specialized labyrinth organ, they extract oxygen directly from the air, surviving and breeding even in thick, toxic mud. Then the environment shifts. The dark, stagnant water gives way to sterile stainless steel, high-pressure washers, and automated food production lines. The paradigm flips. Parasite becomes product. A biological weed that routinely destroys local biodiversity now functions as a strategic protein source. It actively feeds millions of people across the globe every single day. Engineering dictates the outcome. Human technology alone determines whether raw nature acts as a catastrophic threat or a high-yield asset. When you follow Mandarin Tech to track the industrial forces reshaping our reality, a larger question emerges. What other global ecological disasters are simply waiting for the right mega project to consume them? Deep inside the breeding blocks, steel valves hum and feeding algorithms run, quietly rewriting the foundational food chains of the planet.